A retired firefighter lies in a cabin deep in the woods, his breaths growing slower with each passing hour. By his side, a German shepherd who hasn't left him, not for 1 second. What happens next will
It's
restore your
tough,
faith
huh?
in loyalty, love, and something greater. Stay with us as we tell the story of Eli and Shadowa, bond forged in fire, tested by time, and honored to the very end. If this story moves you, please like, subscribe, and stay to witness a quiet miracle unfold. Maple Hollow lay tucked between the folds of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a quiet speck of a town where neighbors waved from porches and time moved with the slow grace of a rocking chair. It was mid-October, and the leaves had turned into a mosaic of flame crimson, amber, rust. Rain had been falling since morning, soft and steady, wrapping the town in a blanket of gray and pine-scented chill. Wind whispered through the trees and scattered brittle leaves across the narrow hospital parking lot. Inside St. Michael's Medical Center, room 213 glowed with the low light of a bedside lamp. Machines beeped in slow rhythm, oxygen hissed quietly through a nasal cannula, and Eli Thompson lay propped up on thin pillows, awake but still. At 78, Eli had the look of someone who had survived more than one lifetime, a former firefighter with a scar across his temple, burn marks down one forearm, and shoulders that had once carried people out of flames. His face was long and deeply lined, with sharp cheekbones, stormy blue eyes, and a quiet expression like he was still listening for sirens. His white hair was clipped close, and he insisted on being clean-shaven firehouse habit, he said. Eli didn't speak much to the nurses. He wasn't unkind, just used to silence. After 25 years in the line of fire and 20 more in solitude, words seemed less necessary. He had no children, no close family, only a cabin in the hills, a chest full of medals he never looked at, and a dog. Or rather, he used to. He'd refused further procedures the moment he was diagnosed with end-stage heart failure. "No more burning buildings," he had said dryly to his doctor. "Let me rest this one out." That doctor was Dr. Lily Carver, 29, new to Maple Hollow, new to palliative care, and still finding the balance between knowledge and kindness. Lily was petite, barely 5'3", with warm brown eyes that always seemed to carry a question. Her curly dark hair was never quite under control, often escaping its ponytail halfway through her shift. She moved fast, thought faster, and tried sometimes too hard to hold it all together. She wore her stethoscope like armor and carried a notebook filled with careful notes and secret doubts. As a child, Lily had often watched her father, also a physician, gradually unravel beneath the weight of loss. Too many patients, too many goodbyes. She had promised herself she would take a different path, kindness without collapse, empathy without erosion. But that quiet vow had started to fray, thread by thread, ever since she came to Maple Hollow, especially the first time she saw Eli. There was something in the way he carried stillness, the way his eyes lingered on the rain-touched window, not blankly, but as if waiting for a sound, a figure, a ghost. He didn't wince when they drew blood, never mentioned pain. He was a man built of soot and iron, slowly softening from within, as if time had traded his flame for ash. Lily had grown used to reading charts like road maps, but Eli's file held something she didn't expect. Under a miscellaneous note tab, someone had typed, "Patient was handler for Shadow, retired GSD, currently under supervision at Rescue K9 Center, not eating since October 7th. Emotional connection strong, contact if needed." Shadow? Curious, Lily turned to the nurses. It was Anne, gray-haired, sharp-tongued, and always ready with a story, who filled in the blanks. Shadow, she said, was a German shepherd, now 11, who had once run into burning buildings alongside Eli for more than 7 years. Even after Eli's retirement, Shadow had stayed behind at the center still strong, still alert, even helping to train the younger recruits. But something changed the day Eli missed his weekly visit. Every Tuesday at 10 sharp, Eli would drive out to the K9 Center, sit on the same bench by the training field, and let Shadow rest his head on his knee like they'd never retired at all. That Tuesday, the bench stayed empty. Shadow waited by the fence for hours, then paced, then whined. By evening, he had stopped eating. Since then, he spent his days pacing along the kennel fence, ears twitching at every passing car. He howled through the night in a deep, mournful tone that shook the metal gates. The handlers said he barely acknowledged them now, and no matter what they tried, he wouldn't respond. He was waiting. Everyone could see it. He was waiting for Eli. That night, Lily stayed late at her desk, the hospital quiet around her, shadows stretching beneath fluorescent lights. Rain tapped at the windows like a soft and constant reminder. She pulled up Shadow's file from the rescue center database, a privilege granted to hospital physicians in the rural system, and read line after line of field reports, floods, fires, avalanches, photos of Eli and Shadow side by side, both soaked and soot-streaked, both focused and alert. She clicked through to the latest notes from Cora James, the rescue center's director, a former EMT in her 40s, with a reputation for being no-nonsense and fiercely loyal to her dogs. Shadow has refused food for 4 days, will not engage with trainers, alerts only to car sounds, exhibits signs of clinical depression, attempted to play old training recordings, brief tail movement at sound of Eli's voice. No further response. Lily leaned back in her chair, heart aching for something she couldn't explain. She wasn't supposed to feel like this attached, but something about the connection between man and dog felt bigger than protocol. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. Dr. Lily Carver sat in her office long after the halls of St. Michael's had gone quiet, the low hum of fluorescent lights the only sound besides the faint thrum of rain outside. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, hesitating, then slowly began to type an internal memo, one she wasn't entirely sure would be read with sympathy. The request was simple on paper, but radical in context. To allow a dog, specifically a retired German shepherd, named Shadow, temporary access to the palliative ward. The justification? Emotional stabilization for a terminal patient. It sounded absurd even to her, but what she had seen in Eli's file and heard from the rescue center refused to leave her alone. The next morning, Lily stepped into the palliative care wing with a purpose. Her white coat was still damp from the drizzle, her curls tucked haphazardly beneath a knit cap. She made her way to the head nurse, Carla Jennings, a sturdy woman in her 50s with cropped salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that bordered on brusque. Carla had worked in this hospital for nearly 30 years and was known to be fiercely protective of her ward. Her uniform was always perfectly pressed, her lanyard decorated with pins from past fundraising runs, and her eyes were quick to narrow when rules were bent. "Morning, Dr. Carver," Carla greeted, handing off a patient chart. "Vitals stable for Mr. Thompson, still refusing painkillers unless absolutely necessary." Lily hesitated, then said, "I'd like to discuss a potential visitor for him." Carla paused, raising an eyebrow. "Family?" "Not exactly," Lily replied. "It's his old search and rescue partner, a German shepherd." There was silence. "A dog," Carla said flatly. "Not just a dog," Lily said, trying not to sound defensive. "They work together in disaster zones, fires, floods. This animal isn't just a companion, he's practically a soldier. Shadow hasn't eaten since Eli was admitted. The connection is strong. I believe a visit could stabilize Mr. Thompson's emotional and possibly physical state." Carla folded her arms. "You're aware of the liability issues, infection control, patient safety. What if the dog lashes out? He's been screened annually, vaccinated, certified for civilian interaction post-retirement. I've already been in contact with the Rescue K-9 Center. They're prepared to bring handlers, paperwork, waivers, everything." Carla looked at her a long moment, then muttered, "You'll need the hospital board." "I know." With that, Lily walked back to her office and pulled up the hospital intranet to draft a formal petition. It would take days, maybe longer, but something inside her had shifted. It wasn't about bending rules, it was about honoring something sacred. That afternoon, she returned to Eli's room. He was awake, seated upright, flipping through a spiral-bound notebook with yellowed pages and a blackened cover. It looked old and scorched in places. "Is that your journal?" she asked. "Sort of," he replied. "Field notes, from back when I still kicked doors down." He handed it to her, and Lily sat beside him, flipping through entries that read like fragments of forgotten war stories. One dated entry from 7 years ago caught her eye. June 14th, Wildfire Unit 12, North Sector, smoke low, visibility worse. We found 2 kids trapped under a fallen beam. Couldn't get to them in time. Shadow alerted us before we even saw the flames. We called him back. He didn't come. He went in anyway, pulled the girl's backpack out so we'd know they were there. We got to them. Barely. He burned his pads, didn't even yelp. Lily looked up, startled. Eli's eyes were distant. I told them to retire him after that. He wouldn't let me leave the next day without him. Is that when you took him home? He nodded. We were a team after that, not just handler and K9, partners. He'd bark if I forgot to take my meds, block the door if I tried to work overtime. He saved me just as much as I saved him. Lily closed the journal gently. I'm trying to get him here. Eli turned to her, eyes suddenly sharp. What? I'm filing a request. The center is willing to bring him in. We'd need clearance from the hospital board, infection control, security, but I think it's possible. He looked down, silent for a long while, then said softly, if I could see him, even once more, I think I could sleep. Later that night, Lily drove through the rain to the Rescue K9 Center on the edge of town. The building was modest, brick and steel, with tall floodlights casting long shadows over the training field. Inside, she was greeted by Cora James, the director mid-40s, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and hair pulled back into a loose braid. Her voice was low and direct, with the clipped edge of someone used to making fast calls under pressure. Dr. Carver, she said, extending a gloved hand. Come to see Shadow? Yes, Lily replied, if that's okay. He's in the back, doesn't really respond to strangers, but you can try. They passed through a hallway lined with framed photos dogs mid-leap through burning buildings, handlers clapping beside rubble, children being pulled from flooded homes. At the end of the hall was a glass-paneled door. Behind it, in a wide kennel lined with worn blankets, lay Shadow. He was massive, his coat still dark and glossy, but his eyes dull with waiting. His ears flicked when Lily entered, but he didn't move. Only when she knelt did he lift his head slightly, sniffing. He's been like that for days, Cora said softly. He still listens when we play Eli's old radio chatter. Stares at the door afterward. He's waiting. Lily swallowed. Would you be willing to bring him to the hospital if we get clearance? Absolutely, Cora said without hesitation. We'll prep everything. 4 handlers, vet papers, liability waivers. I'd carry him myself if I had to. As Lily left the center, her windshield wipers brushing away the darkness in waves, she felt something she hadn't in days' hope. Not the false kind doctors sometimes wore like a mask. Real hope, built not on recovery, but on reunion. Back at the hospital, she stayed late to finalize the request. When the janitor Miguel, a quiet man in his 50s with tired eyes and a gentle gait, came in to mop, he looked over at her, still typing. You're still here, Doc? She smiled. Just one more form. He nodded toward the rain. Storm's gonna break tonight. Might be a good sign. She hoped so. The clock in the east wing of St. Michael's struck 1:58 a.m. Outside, the wind had calmed, leaving behind only the rhythmic tapping of branches against the hospital windows. A heavy hush had settled over the palliative care floor, monitors humming, oxygen flowing, as if even the machines were holding their breath. Room 213, where Eli Thompson lay asleep, was lit only by the soft amber glow of the wall sconce. His chest rose and fell in slow, measured rhythm, shallow but steady. Downstairs, in the dimly lit receiving bay, the service entrance groaned open. A black transport van reversed carefully into the corridor, its hazard lights blinking like silent Morse code. 4 handlers emerged in dark uniforms with the Rescue K9 insignia stitched across their backs. One of them, a tall black man in his early 40s named Isaiah Brooks, walked with an upright, quiet authority. A former Marine K9 unit officer, Isaiah had a square jaw, short-cropped hair, and moved with practiced precision. He had been Shadow's lead handler since Eli retired and was known for a calm presence that steadied even the most anxious dogs. Dr. Lily Carver stood at the entrance in scrubs and a navy fleece jacket, clipboard in hand, trying not to show how fast her heart was racing. She had barely slept in the past 48 hours, ever since the hospital board had signed off on the visit under a limited access protocol she had written herself. The legal team had demanded redundant liability waivers. Infection control had insisted on an isolated route. Maintenance had rechecked every surface Shadow might walk across. But somehow, it had all been approved. You ready for this? Isaiah asked her, glancing sideways. Lily nodded. Are you? He gave a thin smile. Been ready for 2 weeks. He hasn't stopped waiting. The back of the van opened with a click. Shadow stepped down slowly, his coat catching the dim light, black and tan, brushed to a clean sheen. He looked thinner than the photos Lily had seen, his ribs just visible beneath the muscle, but his posture was strong, his ears alert, his eyes alive. As the handlers attached a soft chest harness and leash, Shadow barely reacted. He was focused on the scent sniffing the air like he already knew the way. As they made their way through the silent corridors, the handlers moved in practiced formation, two in front, two behind. A cleaning staff member, Marcy Rivera, petite and in her 60s, with hair always tucked into a blue cap, peeked from around a corner. Her eyes widened at the sight of the dog, but she stepped aside without a word. She had heard the story. By now, most of the staff had. At exactly 2 a.m., Lily opened the door to room 213. Eli was awake. He had woken without prompting moments earlier, heart fluttering in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. Something had stirred him from the haze, a shift in the air, a feeling in his bones. When he saw the silhouette in the doorway, his breath caught. The old soldier in him straightened, despite the wires and oxygen. "Shadow," he whispered, barely audible. The dog didn't wait for a command. He moved forward slowly, the leash loose in Isaiah's hand. As he neared the bed, Shadow's head lowered, tail still, movements deliberate, no lunging, no barking, just a silent approach, as if he understood the sacredness of this moment. He stopped at the edge of the bed, looking up. Eli's hand-veined, trembling age reached out. Shadow pressed his nose gently into the palm, and then, with a grace that defied training, the dog lifted his forepaws onto the edge of the bed, waited for no objection, and laid his body across Eli's side, his head tucked into the hollow of the man's chest. Eli let out a breath, a shudder, a sigh, and his hand found the thick ruff of fur beneath Shadow's ears. Lily stood frozen in the doorway, Isaiah beside her. The monitors, which had been fluctuating with irregular heart rhythms for the past 2 hours, began to level out. Pulse, steadier. Blood pressure, slightly up. Oxygen, improved. "What the hell?" Isaiah murmured. "He hasn't moved like that for days." Eli closed his eyes. "Still my boy," he whispered. "Still knows where I am." For the next 30 minutes, no one moved. Shadow remained still as a statue, his chest rising in slow rhythm against Eli's side. Occasionally, he adjusted his head slightly, emitting a low, satisfied exhale, almost a purr. Eli, too, drifted in and out of sleep, his hand always moving, stroking, pressing gently, never letting go. It wasn't just comfort, it was a ritual, a watch. The same way Shadow had once stood at the edge of burning buildings, waiting for Eli's signal. Now he was holding vigil again, in the dim quiet of a hospital room. Lily finally stepped forward, silent, checking the IV pump and oxygen levels. As she bent close, Shadow's eyes opened, and he watched her hand. There was no aggression, only awareness. He saw everything, felt everything. The dog was guarding him. Later, Lily returned to her office and began writing furiously. She opened a new document and titled it, "Cross-Species Emotional Synchronicity in End-of-Life Care, a Field Observation." Her fingers flew across the keys. She described the stabilized vitals, the observed behavioral stillness in the dog, the sudden calm in the patient. Noting timestamps, physiological changes, emotional tone, but at the end of the document, she stopped typing. For nearly 5 minutes, she stared at the blinking cursor. Then she wrote, "No existing chart can quantify the look in that dog's eyes. No monitor can measure the stillness in the room when they reunited. I've spent years learning to read blood pressure, but tonight I saw a different kind of pressure release, the kind only love makes possible." When she checked the vitals again at 3:30 a.m., Eli was asleep. Shadow had not moved. Isaiah met her in the hallway. "He used to do this after rescues," Isaiah said quietly. "Lay down next to the survivors, wouldn't leave until they slept. We thought it was instinct. Now, I'm not so sure." Lily glanced back through the window. "It's something more." She walked back to the nurse's station where Carla Jennings, usually brisk and skeptical, sat reviewing records. Her eyes flicked to Lily, then to the chart in her hand. "You win, doctor," Carla muttered. Whatever that was, it worked. Lily smiled, exhausted but light. Not me. It was all shadow. As dawn crept up over Maple Hollow, casting pale light through the windows, the hospital slowly stirred to life. But room 213 remained still. Two old companions, one with a faltering heart, the other with a watching soul, rested side by side. And for the first time in weeks, Eli slept without pain. The morning after the midnight reunion, the air in room 213 was tangibly different. The scent of antiseptic still lingered, but beneath it was something warmer: animal fur, forest earth. Breath slowed to rest. Eli Thompson had slept deeper than he had in weeks. Shadow had not moved from his side, his large body curled gently around the man's frame, as if guarding the final lines of a story only they could read. Dr. Lily Carver stood at the foot of the bed just after sunrise, clipboard in hand, heart oddly full. The monitors displayed stable vitals again, anomalous considering Eli's heart condition. She wasn't ready to call it a miracle, but she couldn't deny what she saw. More than that, what she felt. Shadow lifted his head as Lily stepped closer, ears alert, eyes following her. His expression wasn't wary. It was watchful, engaged. She lowered her voice. "Hey, big guy," she said. "You're not planning to leave his side, are you?" Eli stirred, a faint smile forming on his weathered face. He's always known when to stand watch. He turned his eyes to Lily, clear and focused despite his fading strength. "Doc," he said, voice hoarse, "I don't want to die here." Lily looked up. "Eli, I don't mean to sound ungrateful," he continued, gesturing faintly toward the IV line. "You've done more than I ever expected, but this—" He glanced around the room, the pale walls, the machines, the linoleum floor. "This isn't where I want my story to end." He paused, catching his breath. "There's a cabin, back up in Maple Ridge, 10 miles out near the rescue center. Built it myself after I retired. Used to be Shadow's training site. I still pay the taxes. Inside, there's a small room with a cot and a stone stove. There's even a tunnel built off the side Shadow's old run, used to lead straight to it. Had a gate and everything. He could come and go." Lily nodded slowly, already understanding where this was headed. "I want to go home," he said. "To die with the trees, with him, not here." She hesitated. "It won't be easy. Hospice at home means a nurse, equipment, pain management on site, transport approval, clearance from the board." "I've already got the legal side covered," Eli said, a small glint of amusement flickering in his tired eyes. "Knew the day would come. Lawyer's name is Jacob Stein, folders in the drawer. All I need now is a doctor willing to help make the calls." Lily opened the drawer and pulled out the brown folder, surprisingly thick. Inside were notarized forms, living wills, end-of-life directives, and a copy of property records. It was all legitimate, detailed, ironclad. "You planned this," she said quietly. Eli chuckled. "Been around enough dying men to know not to leave it to chance." The next 3 days were a flurry of controlled chaos. Lily coordinated with the hospital administration, then with hospice services in the county. She made dozens of phone calls, submitted formal requests, and worked around the clock between patient visits. At night, she found herself rereading Eli's field journals, trying to understand the man not just as a case, but as a legacy. Meanwhile, word had spread quietly through Maple Hollow. Among those who heard was a boy named Benji Walker, 10 years old, who lived with his aunt near the old fire station. Benji was small for his age, with a mop of messy dark blonde hair and scabbed knees from tree climbing. He was soft-spoken, often lost in his sketchbook, and had a habit of humming to himself when nervous. 7 years ago, when Benji was just a toddler, he and his mother had been caught in a fast-moving brush fire just outside town. His mother hadn't survived, but Benji had pulled from the back seat of their overturned car by a man in a soot-covered jacket and a massive dog with singed fur. That man had been Eli. Benji had grown up with half-remembered stories, a child's impressions of a shadowy hero and the dog with fire in its eyes. When his aunt Jody Walker, a lean woman in her late 30s with calloused hands from running the local hardware store, told him Eli was in the hospital, Benji had said nothing. But that afternoon, he went quietly to the back of the house, pulled out his pencils, and began to draw. On the 4th day, when hospice care approved the cabin setup, Lily drove out to inspect the site herself. The road was narrow and gravel-lined, flanked by pines and low-hanging mist. The cabin sat at the end of a curved drive, wood darkened by years of rain and sun, but still strong. There was an old iron chimney, a porch with 2 chairs, and a wooden sign carved with Thompson's watch. Inside, the space was simple but clean. An old cot, a narrow fireplace, shelves lined with faded books and half-empty tins. In the back room, a sliding gate opened into a short passageway, a run that led to the wooded perimeter of what had once been Shadow's training grounds. Hospice delivered the equipment the next morning: adjustable bed, oxygen tanks, portable IV pump. Lily coordinated with Nurse Pamela Ortiz, a calm, broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with graying curls and a firm but gentle demeanor. Pamela had worked hospice for over a decade and was known for sitting with patients long after her shift officially ended. "I've handled mountain transfers before," Pamela assured Lily. "He'll be safe. As long as the pain is managed and someone's on call, we can do this." "Shadow will be there," Lily added. Pamela nodded. "That helps more than you know." The transport itself took place just after sunrise, with the morning light filtering through clouds as if to honor the journey. Eli was loaded into a private medical van. Shadow followed, climbing in with careful steps, then laying at Eli's feet for the entire ride. Lily rode in the front passenger seat, watching the trees blur past in streaks of gold and pine. At the cabin, a small group had gathered 2 volunteers from the K-9 Center: Pamela, Isaiah, and unexpectedly Benji. He stood beside his aunt, holding a roll of papers in his hands. He approached Eli as they settled him into the bed near the window. "These are for you," he said, voice small. He handed over the drawing sketches of Eli in fire gear, of Shadow leaping through flames, of a boy being pulled from a smoky car. There were scenes Benji couldn't have remembered in full, but his imagination had filled the gaps with color, motion, and awe. Eli blinked, eyes misting. "You were that boy." Benji nodded. Eli looked at the pictures one by one, then handed them to Lily. "Hang these up," he said softly. "Let me die surrounded by what mattered." That evening, the cabin glowed with quiet warmth. Shadow lay curled at the foot of the bed. The drawings lined the walls like windows into a life well lived. Outside, the pines rustled in the wind, and inside, Eli closed his eyes, finally home. The days at the cabin unfolded in quiet, deliberate rhythm, like a prayer whispered into the woods. Autumn deepened, painting the trees around Maple Ridge in deeper ochres and burnished golds. The air had a crisp edge to it now, and at night, the frost laced the cabin windows like a reminder that time, even in this small pocket of grace, could not be stopped. Inside the cabin, the hospice bed had been placed near the largest window, facing east toward the tall pine grove. Eli Thompson spent most of his time reclined beneath a thick wool blanket, eyes open to the light filtering through the trees. The machines beside him beeped gently, unobtrusive oxygen flowing, morphine drip steady. His breath was shallow but measured. He rarely spoke above a whisper now, and yet his presence still seemed to anchor the space. Shadow never left his side. The German shepherd, now fully alert, had regained much of the life that had seemed to drain from him weeks ago. Though his body still carried the stiffness of age and occasional limp when he stood, a wheeze in the mornings, his eyes were bright and fixed on Eli. He slept curled at the foot of the bed or beside it, head resting near Eli's ribs, rising and falling with each of the man's breaths. At night, he would often climb halfway onto the bed and place his head on Eli's chest, listening, always listening. Dr. Lily Carver had taken to visiting daily, not just for medical checks, but because she could not stay away. Each visit added to her growing case study, and yet she'd stopped thinking of it as a case. There was nothing clinical about the bond she witnessed in that room. She began calling it, privately, the watch. That's what Shadow was doing. He wasn't just comforting Eli, he was standing guard. One morning, just after sunrise, Lily arrived to find Shadow at his usual post, tail thumping once in acknowledgement. Nurse Pamela Ortiz was already there, adjusting the IV line. The warm light poured into the cabin, illuminating the wall of Benji's drawings. Over the last few days, new sketches had been added. Shadow lying beneath a tree, Eli holding his fire helmet, and, more recently, Benji himself standing beside the dog, one hand on his back. Eli's voice was barely above a whisper that morning. "Doc," he said, "I want to record something." Lily paused. "A message?" He nodded. "For him." Lily set up the portable recorder on the nightstand, and gestured to Pamela, who gently quieted the room. Shadow looked up as the red light flicked on. Eli's voice cracked, but his words were clear. "If you're hearing this," he began, "it means I've stepped out for good, but not far, boy. You always knew how to follow my scent." He reached down, placing a hand on Shadow's neck. The dog didn't move. "You saved lives with me, pulled kids from rubble, stayed behind in fire zones no one else dared enter. And when I had nothing left to give, you still stayed." There was a pause, the sound of breathing. "You're more than a dog. You're a brother. And if anyone doubts that, tell them to come sit here a while and feel what I feel." He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "You're not alone, boy. The kid Benji. He's got your heart. I see it. Take care of him." When Lily stopped the recording, the room was quiet. Even the trees outside seemed to hush. She slipped the recorder into a small wooden box labeled "For Shadow" and set it on the shelf beside Eli's medals. That afternoon, Benji returned to the cabin. The boy had taken to coming by every other day after school, walking the path through the trees with a backpack full of drawings and snacks he never ate. His aunt, Jody, had allowed the visit so long as Nurse Pamela or Lily was present. Benji would sit near the fireplace, legs crossed, and draw, while Shadow lay beside him. Benji was not a boy who talked much, but with Shadow, he didn't need to. He would rest one hand on the dog's back and draw with the other, humming quietly. Sometimes Eli would speak, telling old stories about rescues or moments of near disaster, turned miraculous by a well-timed bark or an unexpected leap. "Shadow once pulled a full-grown man out of a river," he told Benji one day. "Didn't hesitate, just dove. I almost jumped in after him, thinking I'd have to rescue them both." Benji looked up, eyes wide. "What happened?" he whispered. "They both came back." On another visit, Benji asked to walk Shadow outside. "Just the trail," he said. "We won't go far." Lily hesitated but saw the way Shadow stood immediately at the door, tail wagging gently. Pamela gave a short nod. 10 minutes, she said. "He won't go far from Eli anyway." The walk became routine. Benji and Shadow would walk the circular trail around the cabin, stopping at the spot where Eli had carved their initials into an old oak trunk E+S, scorched by time but still visible. One afternoon, as Lily was packing up her notes, Pamela pulled her aside. The older nurse had a clipboard in one hand, and her tone was calm but firm. "You've seen his stats," Pamela said. "He shouldn't still be this stable." "I know. Pain levels are lower than any patient I've had at this stage. He's lucid. His heart's holding. It's not normal." "No," Lily agreed, "but maybe this isn't supposed to be." That night, Lily wrote until well past midnight, the cabin light casting long shadows behind her. Her article had shifted from clinical to narrative. She wove in vitals and charts, yes, but she also wove in stories. About the look in Shadow's eyes when he heard Eli's voice. About the boy who didn't remember his mother's face but remembered the feel of the dog's fur. About the fireman who had lost everything but never lost loyalty. She titled it, "The Dog Who Waited." By the end of the week, the local paper had heard whispers of the story. A freelance journalist named Helen Marks. In her early 40s, red curls, freckles, and a determined gaze, reached out. Helen had grown up in Maple Hollow, then left for a decade in New York before returning to freelance. She had a sharp pen and a soft spot for animals. Lily invited her out to the cabin, cautiously. Helen observed quietly for an afternoon, camera slung around her neck, notebook in hand. When she left, she said simply, "I don't think I've ever seen something so sacred and so quiet at the same time." The storm rolled in just past midnight, low thunder grumbling through the woods like a voice too tired to raise itself. Rain drummed on the tin roof of the cabin in slow, steady rhythm, like a clock ticking towards something inevitable. Inside, the air was warm and still, the only light a single lamp burning on the shelf above the bed. Eli Thompson lay beneath his wool blanket, his face peaceful, turned slightly toward the window, as if watching the rain. His chest rose and fell, slower now, shallower, but steady. Shadow lay at his side, pressed close, his great head resting on Eli's chest in the same way he had done that first night in room 213. His eyes were half closed, ears occasionally flicking at the distant roll of thunder, but otherwise he did not move. He was still on watch. Pamela Ortiz, the hospice nurse, was seated quietly near the fireplace. She had fallen asleep upright, arms folded across her chest, her dark gray curls frizzing slightly from the cabin's damp. Pamela was a large-framed woman, calm-eyed, with a quiet strength born of years spent beside the dying. She had once worked trauma response, but switched to hospice after a failed resuscitation of a child. Years ago left her questioning whether fighting death was always the right thing. Now, she simply walked with it, gently, and tonight, she waited. Just before dawn, Lily Carver arrived, soaked from the short dash between her car and the cabin door. Her breath misted in the cold air, scrubs damp beneath her coat. Shadow raised his head as she entered, ears twitching once. Lily stepped close, her hand brushing Eli's wrist gently. There was no pulse. Pamela stirred awake as Lily glanced at her. No words were needed. Lily reached for her stethoscope, pressed it gently to Eli's chest, listened, waited, then nodded once. Time of death. 5:17 a.m. Shadow didn't move from his place, but his eyes opened fully. He looked not at Lily, nor at Pamela, but at Eli. Then he released a breath, a long, low exhale that didn't sound like a sigh, but something deeper. Acceptance. Stillness. He lowered his head again. Later that morning, under the soft drizzle that had not yet lifted, the cabin filled with quiet footsteps. Isaiah Brooks arrived first, still wearing his old Rescue K9 jacket, soaked at the shoulders. He knelt beside Shadow, resting one hand on the dog's back. "He didn't leave him," Isaiah said softly. "No," Lily replied. "He never would." Benji Walker arrived with his aunt just after sunrise. The boy was quiet, carrying a rolled sketch pad in his arms, wearing a red hoodie far too big for him, the sleeves covering his hands. His blonde hair was damp, sticking to his forehead. When he entered and saw Shadow lying beside the covered body of Eli, he stopped. Jody, his aunt, a tall woman with dark auburn hair, always pulled back in a tight bun, dressed in plain work jeans and a flannel jacket, placed a hand on his shoulder, but said nothing. Benji walked to the bed, crouched beside Shadow, and placed the sketch pad on the small table next to Eli's hand. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Then, without hesitation, he slid to the floor, sitting beside the dog, his small arm wrapping around Shadow's neck, the other hand gently gripping the dog's ruff. Shadow leaned slightly into the touch, his body heavy with grief, but not resistance. By noon, only a few more had come. Helen Marks, the red-haired freelance journalist, returned with her camera lowered, choosing not to photograph anything. Instead, she sat on the edge of the porch, notebook on her lap, her eyes glassy but focused. 2 retired firefighters from the old station in town also came, both men in their 70s, wearing stiff dress jackets with faded patches and boots that had long since lost their shine. One left a fireman's pin on the shelf beside Eli's folded jacket. No one said much. The cabin didn't ask for words. The service was simple. No church, no priest. Just people. Pamela read a passage Eli had once underlined in a journal about loyalty and flame, about what it meant to run into danger when others ran away. Lily said a few words, her voice steady until the very end. He was a fireman long after the fires were gone. And he was loved. Shadow sat beside the bed the whole time. When it was over, the makeshift casket was carried out under the pine trees. They buried him just beyond the clearing, beside the path where he once walked with Shadow, and, more recently, with Benji. The wind moved gently through the trees. Someone rang a bell twice, then silence. After the burial, while others packed up the remaining equipment, Lily lingered at the porch. Benji approached her, Shadow beside him, now more alert than she'd seen him in days. "Can he stay here?" Benji asked, voice quiet but certain. Lily looked at Jody, who nodded once without hesitation. "I want him to stay," Benji continued. "I want to take care of him, here, where he remembers." Isaiah stepped closer, having overheard. "He won't be alone. We can help with supplies, vet checkups, but he'll choose." They all turned to Shadow. The dog looked from one face to another, then nudged Benji's hand with his nose. And then, with deliberate motion, he walked to the porch, lay down beside the firewood stack, and placed his head on his paws. "He's made up his mind," Lily said. That evening, the last of the visitors left. The cabin, once again, held only the boy and the dog. Benji had changed into dry clothes, an old denim jacket that had once belonged to his grandfather, sleeves rolled up clumsily, and wool socks that slouched at the ankles. Shadow lay at the doorway, eyes half closed, but always turned toward the trees. The wind had calmed. The fire in the hearth crackled low. Benji sat on the porch step, sketchbook open again on his lap, though he hadn't drawn yet. He looked up at the horizon, where the first threads of dawn began weaving through the dark, misty sky. The world was still, no sirens, no voices, just quiet. Shadow stirred beside him, stood, and walked to the porch edge. He sat upright, watching the same horizon. Benji reached over and placed one hand gently on his shoulder. "We're still watching," he said, and the sun rose. Sometimes God's miracles don't roar, they whisper, in a dog who refuses to leave, in a child's quiet kindness, in an old man's final peace beneath the pines. Eli and Shadow showed us that true faith lives in presence, in loyalty, and in the love that never walks away. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment. Share it with someone who still believes in goodness. And if you feel called, write amen to honor love that stays until the very end. Subscribe for more stories of hope and healing. May God bless you and your family today.